We call to order the City Council meeting. It's April 14th, 2016, 7:30. Please rise for invocation by Councilman Randy Allison, followed by a pledge of allegiance.
Heavenly Father, we come tonight to do the business of the city with thankfulness and gratefulness in our hearts for the many blessings that we have bestowed on us in this area, in this city, in the surroundings. Lord, we ask tonight for you to help us as we deliberate, help us to be productive as we consider each of these important items. Lord, give us insight and wisdom as we make decisions. And we ask in the future, Lord, as we face many big problems, many issues, challenges that many cities are facing across this nation, but we need to face them on our own ground, and we ask for success, Lord. We ask that we can produce a productive, safe, and flourishing city for all of the residents of Williamsport. And we ask in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is approval of City Council minutes dated March 31st, 2016. I have a motion and a second on that approval.
So moved.
Second.
With a motion and a second, any comments or questions on those minutes? Hearing none, Mrs. Frank?
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and those minutes are approved. Next item on the agenda is limited courtesy of the floor. We've had no requests this evening, so we can move on to the next item of the agenda is a presentation on an upcoming Drum Corps Associates event being hosted, I think it's by the Williamsport Area High School Marching Band Parents Association, represented by John Shableski.
That's correct. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. President, and City Council members, and everybody here in the room. My name is John Shableski. I'm the president of the Band Parent Association at Williamsport High School. We are the support group, the foundation for the marching band organization at the high school. And over the past few years, we've made some very amazing strides in the type of program that's presented for the school. It actually happens to coincide with the Return to Glory campaign. And along with that is an opportunity for us to really bring a spotlight to the city of Williamsport with the Drum Corps show that we'll be hosting on August 13th up at STA Stadium. And if you've never seen Drum Corps, I kind of describe it as the NFL meets marching band. It is a really intense athletic event where the musicians not only have to learn 200 positions where they've got to be on the field, but they've got to learn 5 or 6 songs and not crash into people and put on an amazing show. You have, by the way, the presentation that I'll be taking through the community to talk more about this show. Our show on August 13th is actually one that we picked up. We've been working on this for almost 2 years now. We picked up from Bucknell University that used to happen there a couple of years ago. I became aware of Drum Corps through my kids, and now I'm a geek for Drum Corps, which is a pretty cool thing to have. There are 30 people from Williamsport that make up they make up a very big share of the Hawthorne Caballeros out of New Jersey. The Hawthorne Caballeros are our core sponsor for this show. And so every weekend there are 30 people piling into vans to go down and compete with another 100 people as part of that operation. Last year, 6 of those were students from the high school who beat out music teachers and music professionals, which tells you the level of competition these kids are up against and what they can compete for, which is pretty amazing. Our corps are from Hawthorne. The Reading Buccaneers are from Reading, Pennsylvania. Connecticut Hurricanes, the Skyliners are from New York. White Sabres, Fusion Corps, and Long Island Sunrisers make up right now the current list of corps coming in to compete for our show. This show will generate somewhere around $750,000 in revenue for the local economy just for that weekend. This also puts us into contention to host, as the city of Williamsport, the World Championships in 2018, 2019. Those two shows each are worth $10 million, a minimum, to the community. So combined, it's worth $20 million. So this is a really big audition for us. We do this show right on August 13th, and the board of directors for the DCA are coming in to watch how we do this. They've already been here for a site visit, and we did a really great job. Jason Fink and the rest of the folks who are on that steering committee did an awesome job of showing them around the city and showing what we're capable of doing. I'd like to show you a real quick video clip here of what this looks like. I'm not sure we're going to have enough sound for it, but you'll get the gist. It's really impressive with the music. A little bit farther. Nope, keep going. One more. It seems really long without music. One more. This is the last one. The reason why I wanted you to see this one is that's the one that has 30 kids from Williamsport on the field. There you go. So it's that type of show that we're going to be bringing here to Williamsport on August 13th. And then that video actually represents what you would see at the World Championships in 2018 and 2019. Again, our partner corps for this show is the Hawthorne Caballeros. We're looking at an audience of anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 people. We've already begun marketing campaigns using social media, and there's print ads that are being placed in like Susquehanna Life, West Branch Living, and Mountain Home magazine because they're on a quarterly basis. So there's places where those are going to be seen on a regular basis as well. We also have something new for Williamsport Stadium that's never been used before. Is the spaces off to the side, the green spaces off to the side, are going to be festival seating for people with small children who can't handle sitting in the bleachers for a long period of time. So we're going to open that up, and that actually helps put us into the larger venue seating area that we need to qualify for the World Championships. And there's more benefits than just the revenue for us on this. Each of the corps come in and practice at a school, at a rehearsal site. And part of that deal, part of that relationship is that the corps hold a clinic for those marching band or those music programs at each one of those schools as just a natural exchange. And it's great to see how that infuses itself into the music programs as they move forward. And the final point I'd like to make is every so often you hear over the years people talk about making cuts to budgets and what doesn't generate revenue. And this is one of the first cases where we get to show you that a music program does generate revenue for a city, which is a pretty awesome thing to be able to accomplish and show you firsthand. And also, one more thing before I go. I'd like to say thank you to Dr. Adams, Jason Fink at the Chamber, Todd Kendall, our music director, Sean McCann, the athletic director, Brian McCaffrey, who's been overseeing all the developments for the stadium, and our tourism board for the grant that they've given us. You're my first stop on the fundraising tour to help make this thing happen. It's going to cost us about $25,000 to produce, but I think we can do it. Any questions?
I want to thank you for giving us opportunity and update on both the opportunities this presents Williamsport this year, and to think about 3,000 to 5,000 people, many of which will be staying in hotels and eating in restaurants and buying chocolate and
Nice touch on the chocolate there.
and the community and investing that kind of money on this weekend, and then the potential for the impact over the long term as these repeat, especially if the championship comes forward. I think it's a really exciting economic development opportunity for the city. I had the opportunity to go with my family to the championship in Rochester last year, and what you're talking about is stealing this from a quite a bit larger city. And having that be an investment where people are, it's not just a one-day event, it's 3 or 4 day event.
Yes.
I don't remember the exact attendance at the event I was at, but it seemed like it was 8,000 or 10,000 people. And so think of the multiplier that would have, and it sounds like 18 or 19 or both.
And there's additional attention coming from other circuits who are interested now in Williamsport. Which is just the beginning. I just wanted to start with the key points for this, but there are other tours that will now be on the radar for, which is, again, another opportunity. I'll be back in to talk about those as well.
That sounds great. And I know the mayor and River Valley Transit have been working with you as well as of course, the Visitors Bureau to provide what we can for that. And so I want to thank the mayor for that part and offer up probably not money, but other things that council might
love and support goes a long way.
Love and support, whatever council can do to love and support the program, and thank you for your role in bringing it to Williamsport. Do you have other comments or questions, Mr. Allison?
Well, having had 4 children who graduated from Williamsport High School and now have 4 grandchildren working their way through, I don't have to be convinced at all of the value of the music program.
Thank you.
Close up hand, up close, and the benefit is far beyond what you can put a monetary price on. The enrichment, the exposure for students to different kinds of music, and to hone skills and talents that maybe they didn't even realize they had. It's a great asset. But I'm impressed by the organization behind this. I just wondered how long you've been working on this and how you were able to get it here.
Really, it's been about 2 years, and it started, honestly, when my oldest son first became a drum corps member. In my real world, I work in publishing and also develop conferences and conventions. So I know the mechanics that are involved in putting something like that together. And fortunately, on our board of directors for the band program, we have other people who have similar experiences. But we had gone down to see my youngest son compete at a show at Bucknell University, and one of the management personnel for the Hawthorne Caballeros happened to say, just within earshot, well, this is our last time coming to Bucknell. And I knew that they were working on the Return to Glory campaign, and I was trying to do the math to figure out how close this was going to happen. And we actually had a shot at it last year, but obviously with the field, torn up, we couldn't do anything with that. And so I started lobbying very seriously with all those people and going to the shows and making sure that they understood we're not just being nice and saying, hey, it'd be cool to have you. They took it very seriously, which was fantastic for us. And it just so happened that the calendar worked out for us to get the show at this time. Now, in what's interesting about the conversations I've been having with the DCA board is that they say, if this just so happens to come together that you get the World Championships, we're going to have to move your show to June or July, earlier on the schedule, because if you have a show this close to World Championships, the local audience who's been there in August isn't really going to see that much difference in the competition level. And so it's nice to hear that kind of psychology coming into play where they're already seeing how this links together for us. So we would do it probably the same weekend for the first 2 years. And then should it come together, knock on wood, that our show would move up to June or July. And as it is, we're towards the end of the season, so we're seeing these corps come in at the top of their form. They're getting ready. They're putting it all on the field as they're getting ready to go to championships. So we get to see some really amazing performances.
Thank you very much for your
Thank you.
efforts.
Any other comments or questions, Ms. Katz?
This is so exciting because it's been a good many years since the drum corps competition has been in our area. The last has been, I think, in the 70s or 80s.
I think Mayor Preciosi was marching with the Black Eagles back then.
It was
Yeah.
incredible. And that was on Bowman Field, I think. that
Yes,
this was done.
yes, it was.
And they were incredible, absolutely. And it was so exciting to see this. So to have this back in our area again, I think people that have never seen this kind of competition will be thrilled and excited to see how this kind of performance is live. To see this live is just so exciting.
It is.
So, and this is a different side of you from the Comic-Con.
Well, thank you. I can wear different hats from
I
time to
think
time.
I want to know what he dresses up as. Any other comments or questions?
For Comic-Con?
Yeah.
It depends on the show.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming
Thank
out
you.
tonight, and please
Much
do let us know what we can do to help.
You got it.
The next item on the agenda is mayoral proclamation related to fair housing. Mr. Mayor, how are you this evening?
Dr. President, Mr. Vice President, members of City Council, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening as we recognize April 2016 as Fair Housing Month. I do have a proclamation. I'm not going to go through it because I don't want to bore you too much. It is quite lengthy, but there's several segments that I would like to read to you, most important ones. Whereas throughout the month of April 2016, special emphasis will be given to the spirit of cooperation being provided through the efforts of our state, federal, and local governments, and with the support of countless community and nonprofit organizations. And whereas promoting equal housing opportunities is essential to our larger mission of promoting freedom and justice in all areas of life, and for all citizens, an equal housing opportunity has a dramatic impact on community and understanding of ethnic and racial diversity. And it will continue to be the city's commitment to make sure that these values are enforced and enhanced in this city. There's a couple individuals I'd like to recognize that have been very, very helpful in regards to this commission, and that's Mark Holt and Mary Rosinski. There are several other members that are not here this evening, but if those two individuals could please rise. If we could give them a round of applause for their help. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Which brings us to the next item on the agenda, an ordinance amending Article 199. Mrs. Frank, in short form, please. In final reading.
An ordinance amending Article 199 of the Codified Ordinances, East 3rd Street Gateway Revitalization Ordinance.
Can I have a motion and a second to approve the ordinance in final reading?
Second.
I heard a motion and a second. I'm slated to present. I have nothing further to add other than heard from a few members of the commission looking happy to see this moving forward and looking forward to their continuing their work, including the next stage, which we discussed last time, hearing the results of the traffic study. Comments or questions from members of council? Hearing none, Ms. Frank, on ordinance and final reading, please.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and that ordinance is approved in final reading. And Mayor, you and I can sit together soon and make sure that we coordinate those appointments as we had discussed prior. That sounds great. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is resolution to authorize an MOU between the City of Williamsport and the Williamsport Sanitary Authority. Mrs. Frank, please.
Resolution to authorize a memorandum of understanding between the City of Williamsport and the Williamsport Sanitary Authority for a stormwater management service feasibility study. Whereas the City Council of the City of Williamsport authorized the amendment to the Articles of Incorporation of the Williamsport Sanitary Authority to enable the said authority to also provide for stormwater system planning, management, and implementation, authorized by Resolution Number 8487, dated August 6, 2015. And whereas the City Council of the City of Williamsport agrees that a feasibility study is appropriate to determine the scope of stormwater management services that the authority could provide to the city. Now therefore be it resolved by the City Council of the City of Williamsport that the attached memorandum of understanding between the City of Williamsport and the Williamsport Sanitary Authority providing for the stormwater management services feasibility study by Arcadis Engineering is hereby approved. Be it further resolved that the appropriate city officials are authorized to execute the memorandum of understanding.
Thank you. May I have a motion and a second on the resolution, please?
So move. Second.
Motion and a second. Mr. Grado, how are you this evening?
Good evening, President Williamson and members of council. As was indicated in the resolution back in August 6, 2015, council authorized the amendment of the Sanitary Authority's Articles of Incorporation to address stormwater management, planning, and implementation. This is the next step in that process in order to establish a stormwater management program for that to occur. The MOU between the City of Williamsport and the Williamsport Sanitary Authority provides for the feasibility study for the authority's engineer, Arcadis, to undertake over the next year or so. There's no schedule at this point. Chuck Hauser is here this evening and can probably expand a little bit on Arcadis and their scope of work. But the feasibility study is of $153,000. They've spent approximately $30,000 in the MOU to date. Part of the scope of work for that would be a public outreach and education program as it relates to stormwater management activities. Those being and the reason we're pursuing this and asking the authority to kind of take over some of those responsibilities, and by this feasibility study, it'll establish what those criteria would be. I mean, ultimately, this does come back to City Council after feasibility study is undertaken. And there is a stakeholder advisory committee that'll be established, a public education program. I know councils, representatives from council will be on that committee. But it also, Arcadis, which has started the assessment of the city's existing stormwater system, we're looking at both flood protection and pollution prevention, which is under the MS4 program. As council's been aware, we've had an NPDES permit, the city has, under the 12 municipal advisory committees. We're on a joint permit with other municipalities, DEP and through EPA under the Chesapeake Bay Pollution Reduction Plan. That regulatory requirements have been expanding, and it's anticipating to increase in the regulatory requirements. So this, as well as we're undergoing our levy recertification and the levy process, I know this work went through Public Works quite lengthy, and I'm sure that'll be discussed later. Plus, we have the Graphius Run issue. So the feasibility study will address all of those during that process, and there'll be adequate public involvement and education, as I had indicated. This MOU did go before both the Public Works Committee and the Finance Committee, and it also was approved by the Williamsport Sanitary Authority. So,
thank you, Mr. Grado. Mr. Smith from Public Works.
Public Works did discuss this this past Tuesday, and just a reminder of kind of what this boils down to is DCNR and the EPA have handed down another set of unfunded mandates and regulations that we have to participate in as a city. One of the things that I would like to clarify very quickly is you may have seen the press article the other day about us shifting responsibility to another entity. That's not true. We are not shifting any of our responsibility. The federal government and the state government states that we are ultimately responsible for treating the stormwater situation. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't have another entity doing that for us and answering to us ultimately of how that's being done. But the responsibility does come back to the city of Williamsport. So that was a little bit misleading that we are handing that off to another entity. We are not doing that. The stormwater regulations that are coming from EPA and DCNR affects every city in the United States, not just Williamsport. It affects every home in the United States and every business in the United States. We do have time frames that ultimately we have to meet in order to satisfy EPA and DCNR regulations. And as Mr. Grado pointed out, this has really been started by, in our area, the Chesapeake Bay Initiative, and this is part of the pollution reduction program. We have to treat sewage in a proper way, and now we have to treat stormwater in a proper method. We just can't take stormwater and dump it into the Susquehanna River, such has been done many years ago because of the fact that there are chemicals, there's oil, there's gasoline, spills, and things of that nature that are in there. And while we're talking about that, ultimately the responsibility comes back to us as a city. In other words, if there are hazardous materials that are poured down or gain their way into the sewer system, years ago, DCNR and EPA were responsible for finding those perpetrators and finding them. However, they have now shifted that off to the city. So we have to find out who did that. We have to initiate the prosecution of that. However, we're also mandated for all the cleanup costs. And the Public Works Committee is working on a possible licensing and registration of entities that are working with oil and petroleum products within the city of Williamsport. We've had 2 issues in the last year of oil spills into the city sewer system, of which we were responsible and had to bring in hazmat crews to clean it up. The entity involved did not have insurance, so we ultimately had to pay for it, and we're recovering, in the process of recovering those funds from that entity. We started this project, I guess, maybe a year and a half ago or 2 years ago when we found out what we had to do. And we did research on this and found out that we really have a couple ways to handle this stormwater situation. We can either do it ourselves as a city, or we can ask someone with more experience and have the equipment and the manpower and other operations already in place to do this. When we as a city looked at doing this, we were going to have to start from the ground up, meaning we were going to have to hire a large number of people. We're going to have to hire engineering people, people that are expert in doing rate structuring. We were going to have to buy trucks, backhoes. Much equipment was going to have to be employed to do this properly. The Williamsport Sanitary Authority, and I call them the WMSA, which is the initials for them, have all of this material already in place. They've been doing this for years and years with both water, supplying water to us, and maintaining the sewage treatment plants, of which we all know have been upgraded very much in the last few years. So it only seemed logically that we should sit down with those folks and see if there's synergies there that could be combined, that perhaps they could assist us in doing this, also saving the city taxpayers dollars so that we don't have to reinvent the process all over again. We have had discussions with Doug Keith, the manager, Chuck Hauser, the chief engineer, and I just want to say that working with those two gentlemen and the board has been a very, very good experience. They're willing to sit down, discuss this. They have really done their homework on coming into attempting to help us with this project. And as you know, we had brought 2 resolutions prior to City Council that was going to allow the WMSA to change their articles of incorporation because they were not set up to do stormwater. That was approved by their board and approved by this City Council. What this resolution, as Mr. Grado has pointed out, is now a memorandum of understanding that we are now asking the WMSA to move forward with their engineering firm, Arcadis, which is very well known in the industry and comes with a very high reputation of working in this field. By passing this resolution, we would give them the okay for the WMSA to start this stormwater management project. The dollar figures in there are approximate dollar figures that have been taken from Arcadis projections, and as Mr. Grado stated, we have before us the scope of the work that's going to be done, which is very extensive. Everything from the stormwater management program development, organizational structure, program priority requirements, the financial plan, public outreach and education, which we definitely want to be involved in with both City Council and the WMSA. That is the attitude that our entire council members have now taken. We want the public to be very informed on all of the projects that are being conducted within the city. And we were just given another big one this week that's coming up. So public outreach, education, the concept acceptance, outreach materials and feedback, presentation and facilitation, stakeholder advisory committee. We want the public to have input into this, organizational and staffing. Then we come upon the rate structure, basis of billing, rate structure alternatives, the credit policy for consideration, appeals process, billing options, and stormwater fee ordinance. This is not something that's going to be free. There is a lot of work that has to be done in order to bring our storm sewer system and so forth into compliance. Nothing is free. And with the fact that this is federally mandated, that's even more significant that it's not free. These folks have the capability of coming up with a rate structure that City Council will approve. Again, we've not handed off our responsibility to some other entity. We will be involved throughout the entire process, and we meet regularly with Doug Keith and also Chuck Hauser to keep up to date on what is happening. So, in essence, this resolution will allow us to move forward for them to employ Arcadis Consulting Company to begin a scope of services project. We will watch the dollar fees as we go through this. This memorandum of understanding points out how these fees will be paid and how they will be at some point recovered. Now, as Mr. Grado pointed out, as you all know, we've been talking about this now for 3 years, the levy study. And we're now to the point where very soon we are going to have the actual results of what these 3 years of work has accomplished. At that time, we will also know what the costs are going to be. And I know we get asked periodically, well, what do you think? What do you think the costs are going to be? As I said before here many, many weeks ago, it's going to be in the millions of dollars. How many millions? We don't know that yet, but we know that's where it's going to be, based on some preliminary findings. We have worked with and engaged over the last 3 years AMEC Engineering, which specializes in the levee study work, and we're also going to be working with the WMSA as to how possibly some of that levee work can be incorporated with the work they're going to be doing in the future. Again, they have a lot of equipment, they have a lot of capability, and they have a lot of very competent staff. So by combining their resources and our resources, we're trying to do what's going to be the best for the public and everyone in the area. So after discussing this, we voted to send this to the full council with a positive recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Mealy from Finance.
I think between Mr. Smith and Mr. Grado, we've pretty much covered the subject, but I do have a few notes from the Finance Committee. Finance, of course, is primarily concerned with the financial elements, so our primary inquiry was related to precisely how, if at all, the city could wind up paying $153,000 for this study. Anyway, the net conclusion is that we are phrasing this as a feasibility study, but of course we wouldn't even be entering into the sort of second portion of the investigation if we weren't 95% certain that this was something that the authority wanted to take on and something that was indeed feasible for the Water and Sewer Authority to undertake as well. Pretty much this tail end of the feasibility study will help us to understand how to do it. And the important thing to understand as well then about this investment is that even if for some reason, some completely unimaginable reason, it were to wind up that the authority and the city couldn't come to some agreement about how to implement this, the city would have the benefit of a study that was basically giving us all the numbers and all the instructions on how to begin to envision creating some sort of stormwater, plan for the city moving forward. However, the authority is committed, and we already have a pretty good idea of the scope of what they're looking at. We're just waiting for the numbers to roll in. So the levy study, I believe it was June. We're hoping to have final numbers on the cost of the levy improvements that we'll need. Sorry, Jonathan.
No.
Okay.
I'm both looking forward to and dreading that date.
Yeah.
We're not going to be here that night.
Yeah. That was an intake of breath.
Sorry. Involuntary.
And the feasibility study will also begin to help us involve the public both in an advisory capacity to make certain that we're getting inputs from both residents and industry within the community, and help us to inform the public through public meetings of exactly what might be coming at us. The last note that I should make is that the Stormwater Authority is actually a pretty new option for those of us in Pennsylvania. I think it was maybe 2 years ago that it first
Yeah, it
hit
was
the legislature.
2013 that the
Yeah.
act was approved by the state that it was like the enabling legislation for stormwater authorities.
Exactly. So we're actually pretty quick to jump on this opportunity, I guess. The levy, of course, was a helpful push. But, and aside from that, my impression was that the work on the feasibility study should be done no later than the end of 2016, correct, John?
Yeah.
But implementation, of course, might take substantially longer than that. They're still discussing it, and the feasibility study will give us some idea of when we can expect to implement the findings. But at least we should begin to get a handle on things by June and know more or less what our path moving forward is by the end of 2016. And I will open it up to other members of the Finance Committee if I missed anything from our discussion on Tuesday.
Sorry, did I miss recommendation?
Excuse me. And we passed it to the full body of council with a positive recommendation.
Thank you. Comments or questions from members of council? Mr. Allison.
I agree with what Councilman Smith said, and I don't think he missed anything, Councilwoman. This isn't something we went out to look for a way to spend money on infrastructure. However, in our discussion with Mr. Grado, we talked about the levee system being built in the early 50s. A lot of the stormwater infrastructure, especially in the city, is old. And it was designed when the main concern, I would imagine, was dealing with volumes of water, not necessarily what was in it or where it went. But we're in a different, we just happen to hit in the generation now when a lot of these things need addressed, and because of advanced technology and advanced understanding and advanced bureaucratic legislation that really is never voted on but passed down, we have to address this. So this is a good first step. And we also, in speaking with Mr. Hauser, understand that we are doing it first, but it's really a regional problem. And, you know, we really need to begin thinking that way in Lycoming County regionally about some of the big issues we have, because we have political boundaries, but life today transcends those, and we share in a lot of these things. So moving forward, we won't be the only ones dealing with this issue, but we're the big dogs, so we have to deal with a lot of it first. So, and as far as the financial impact on the community, Mr. Hauser said that they will be in discussions and negotiations with the business and commercial people, and the residents will have their input and a chance to hear the whole story. So it'll be our job to work with them to ensure that it gets a fair and open hearing, and before we move ahead with any actual infrastructure. Thanks.
Mr. Noviello?
I don't want to repeat what was already said, but just to quickly mention that it was already noted that this has been a sort of a long process, and that is the absolute truth regarding that. As a matter of fact, I think Mr. Hauser has become an honorary member of the Public Works Committee by this time. But I do want to take a moment just to thank him, particularly for all the effort that he's put forward and all his foreknowledge that have helped us sort of, in a sense, answer some questions before they were even asked in some regard. And then at the same time, Mr. Grado for his efforts, as he always puts forth for us, and his ability to explain things in great detail that has really lightened our load on the Public Works Committee by giving us a sense of calmness in the midst of all this hubbub that's taking place here. So I just want to take an opportunity to thank both of them and look to further discussions, and the opening this up to the public is more than welcome in my mind. So thank you all. Thank you, Mr. President.
Absolutely, Mrs. Katz.
I think when the public gets to see what Arcadis does, their presentation is really excellent. It gives a blow-by-blow of exactly what has to be done, why it has to be done, and it certainly was, informative to us. Penn Strategies also worked very hard on developing this resolution, and we've gone through how many times with this trying to get the verbiage correct, and but I do feel the public is going to be really well informed by the time this is all said and done. And I want to thank the Water Authority for what they're doing, John Grado. It is a long process, and it's a longer process that's going to become to us in the next few years here. And thank you.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Mr. Henderson?
I just have a question. That is, this agreement says the authority shall keep the city informed of all material decisions. I guess I'm wondering, is there a plan for this? Is there like a monthly report, a written report or something? Is there an idea of how that's going to be followed through on?
Well, and I'm not sure if Chuck wants to respond, but I know that there is an advisory committee that will be meeting on a regular basis, and we usually have that through the Public Works Committee. So, and if we're looking at written reports, I think, I'm sure the authority can provide that through Arcadis, as the status. There is what they call a Gantt chart as to where the schedule is and where we are for each of those activities. And also, there'll be a member of City Council on that Stormwater Advisory Committee. So,
thank you.
Thank you. Hearing no other further comments, let me just ask a question to follow up on what Mr. Allison said. We talked about, he mentioned regionalization, and I know that for Water and Sanitary Authority business, we have municipal partners that are part of the coalition with Williamsport and in partnership with the Water and Sanitary Authorities. Are we anticipating that same partnership from the very beginning with those municipalities? And then my follow-up would be, and others?
We anticipate that only because, we were already kind of joined at the permit stage because there are 10 municipalities of the 12 that are required to have NPDES permits. 10 of us have done a joint permit. We do that for economic purposes, but also, as you know, we have the MS4 coordinator. The county is kind of assisting in that activity. And they've been advised of, on our monthly meetings on the status of where the city is with the Stormwater Authority. And as you indicated, the authority does manage water lines throughout in other municipalities where it's appropriate, and I believe in the sanitary conveyance systems for Loyalsock Township now. So they do negotiate and then work with those municipalities, even though they're, again, as we had, they're separate entities, but also they are responsible for their systems. They just use the authority because it makes sense. And with us, we're going into that process for stormwater because it makes sense, especially with what we're faced with as far as the economic cost, but also because they're working in the same, when they're working with water and sanitary, the storm sewers are right there. So it just makes sense for that. So.
And the reason I bring it up is, there's a possibility that this resolution puts the city on a hook financially, in a small way, but an important way. We think, as Ms. Mealy said, that we're going to proceed forward and that the financial commitment here will ultimately be part of the overall program managed by the authority. But it's sort of emblematic of the bigger thing is I would hope, I don't know if it makes sense, but if it does make sense, that a similar agreement of memorandum of understanding could be put together with some of those other or all of those other municipalities so that Arcadis's scope of work would include those other municipalities in their work, and also similar kind of provision so that if the contract, if that scope of work costs $153,000 for the city and there's a incremental increase because other municipal partners are part of it, one, it'll be a cost savings for the entire region for just the feasibility study, but also if the process then were to not move forward in the way that we hope and anticipate will be the best process where the authority would take on these responsibilities, that then the cost would not be borne entirely by the city or, of course, entirely by the authority, but then would be spread out along the region. And if we can start with the same partners that we have for water and sanitary, and then build from that as things unroll and maybe really make it a true region even beyond those original municipalities. It's worth exploring here from the very beginning at least. And I haven't been privy to exactly how far those discussions may be going, so that may already be in the works. I just wanted to bring that up. Regionalization is absolutely the way to make a lot of our challenges at least a little more manageable. With no further comments or questions, Ms. Frank, on the resolution, please.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and the resolution is approved. And let me thank Mr. Grado and Mr. Hauser and the authority, as well as Public Works Committee, because they've put in quite a bit of work over the last couple of years to get us to this point, and we've got a long way to go, I know. I'm going to jump down just because we have another, I think, someone in the audience connected to Item number 13, demolition. Is that right, Mr. Girardi? Yep. Joe? Do we have, is it a good time for you? Okay. The next item then is demolition for 1419 Memorial Avenue. Mr. Girardi?
Yes, I apologize.
Oh, that's okay. I didn't catch your attention ahead of time.
President Williamson and members of council, what you have before you is a request to demolish a structure located at 1419 Memorial Avenue for St. Paul's Calvary United Methodist Church. It's in an R2 residential zoning district. The structure was used as a single-family rental unit and is currently vacant. They do not have any plans to construct anything new on the property. They will then fill it and seed it. And I have attached a picture of showing the structure. The church, I believe, is on the left-hand side of this structure. No, excuse me, it's on the right-hand side. And you'll see the house that they like to demolish, and we do have a representative here in case you have any questions of her or myself.
Thank you very much. May I have a motion and a second to approve the demolition?
So move.
Having a motion, is there a second?
Second.
With a motion and a second. Comments or questions from members of council? Mr. Smith, do you need to?
I will be abstaining due to a direct relationship with the entity.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Ms. Katz?
How long has this home been vacant?
I would have to ask.
If you could state your name and affiliation for the record, please.
Thank you. Reverend Janet Wirtz, and I'm the current pastor at St. Paul Calvary. November.
This past November?
Yes.
What was the reason for the vacancy?
We renegotiated the lease because we were looking to make some decisions about the property, and the tenant agreed to the renegotiation but then moved out.
I guess the reason I ask this is because we get demolitions come to us so often, and it's disheartening to see homes that are demoed for some of the reasons of lack of upkeep, and we have more and more that I think we question anymore because of that because of the lack of upkeep. When they didn't renegotiate the lease, why didn't you get anybody else in there then? And why in such a short period of time do you want to demo this?
We have been looking at this over the last year. We are not interested in having another rental unit and having that rental unit. If we do not, it will be part of the church, and so it will become a different facility. It will not be used for housing.
Okay. It's just a shame, again.
Yeah.
Mr. Noviel?
Just very quickly, was there ever a maintenance plan for the property at all through the church itself?
Yes, that they had inspections on the property and some maintenance. They had a long-term tenant, was not always forthcoming with what was going on in the property. But it's not in terrible shape, but it's not in the best shape, but.
And you have no plans in consideration at this time?
No.
Thank you.
Mr. Allison?
Has this always been a part of the church?
No, it was purchased November of 2007.
For the purpose of expanding the church, or?
I believe you have that information. At the time of the purchase, it was made to allow access to service our air conditioning units, spouting issues, and windows. The property bordered our property with minimal setback and required us to seek permission to enter the previous owner's yard for servicing of those issues. The long-range plan was to demolish the house for future church building expansion. That did not happen.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Mealy?
Well, two questions, and that's not being anticipated at this point either. So it will just be pretty much a lawn behind the church?
Yes, a green space at this point.
Okay. Well, just from obviously council can't require this, we only require grass, but obviously it would seem like certainly it might make a nice addition in terms of play area or something like that.
That has been discussed. We have not discussed yet possible future use of that space. Right now, we're thinking green space. Several ideas have been brought forward, and actually, children's play area is one of the ideas. I don't know if that will proceed with that, but yes.
Seems like it would be a nice thing, not just for the church, but for the neighborhood, which,
There are minimal
beneficial.
green spaces and open spaces in our immediate neighborhood.
And the other question I had, Joe, is that if that information about access to the air conditioning was supposed to be in our packet, it's not. I think maybe we've fallen a little bit by the wayside. We used to get a copy of the full demolition ordinance.
I did not receive the information to give to you.
Oh, okay.
It's just, if it was sent in, it was never sent to me, and I never received it to give to you. You typically
Got it.
forward you anything I get.
Steinbacher Enterprises did the application process, and I'm just reading from a letter that I wrote to them,
Oh, okay.
And I
Well,
just have the application process, I don't have the letter.
which I'd be happy to leave with
got it.
you.
Oh, no, that's fine. I was just thinking if that was included within the application, at this point, we're pretty much just getting the photo and the cover sheet. So maybe we should think about including the applications if there's germane information as a part of them too. So, because, obviously those are questions that we sometimes have, what leads to things like this. That's everything.
Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, Ms. Frank on the motion to approve the demolition.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Abstain?
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and the demolition is approved. Next item on the agenda.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Mr. Joe. Is a resolution for users agreement for Bowman Field. Mrs. Frank, please.
A resolution authorizing the execution of agreements for the use of Bowman Field. Be it hereby resolved by the City Council of the City of Williamsport that the following uses of Bowman Field be permitted for 2016, and authorizing the mayor and city controller to execute an agreement with the Williamsport Area School District for the Backyard Brawl, Hughesville High School JV and varsity baseball game, Pennsylvania Interscholastic Athletic Association for the PIAA District 4 tournament in the first round of PIAA State Baseball Tournament. Number 4, St. John Newman baseball games. Number 5, Penn College 2016 season baseball games. Number 6, Muncie Area School District baseball game. And number 7, American Cancer Society Coaches versus Cancer.
Thank you. Can I have a motion and a second on the resolution, please?
So move.
Second.
Here, a motion and a second. Mr. Grado.
Yeah.
How are you?
Not quite. Yeah, Justin asked me to cover this. These are standard uses of Bowman Field that are done each year. They are reviewed and they were reviewed and approved by both the Rec Commission and the Bowman Field Commission. He did attach the conditions for use agreements and where it indicates the fees for each, and also the insurance requirements and such. So I'd be happy to answer any questions if I can, or Tommy can probably do, or the mayor.
All right, thank you. I believe this was reviewed by the Finance Committee.
Yes, it was reviewed by Finance and forwarded to the full body of council with a positive recommendation. There's only one potential overlap date within the whole schedule of events at Bowman Field. And so there's, all in all, everything looks pretty cut and dried. The one note that I would make, we actually did not discuss at Finance, and I can raise this with Justin as well later. At some point in the past, we had talked about perhaps trying to institute a split rate with Bowman Field. All of these entities are nonprofit entities, or they're nonprofit events. So they would all fall into the same category, but we had talked about if we were looking at events, perhaps like for-profit events, whether or not we should consider a secondary rate scheme. I don't believe that we've ever developed it, so just bringing that back up. Jay David's giving me a frown, like perhaps that's not legal. But anyway, aside from that, everything was completely as normal as we see every year.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from members of council? Hearing none, Mrs. Frank on the resolution.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and the resolution is approved. Next item on the agenda is a resolution awarding aggregate bids for the city of Williamsport. Ms. Frank, in summary, please.
A resolution awarding the aggregate bids for the city of Williamsport for the period of April 1st, 2016 through March 31st, 2017. Be it hereby resolved by the City Council of the City of Williamsport that the contract for aggregates for the City of Williamsport be awarded to the following vendors for the items listed below, beginning April 1st, 2016 and ending March 31st, 2017.
That's fine, thank you. May I have a motion and a second on the resolution?
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Chilla, how are you this evening?
Wonderful, thank you. Good evening, President Williamson, members of council, and I was going to say good evening to Mark Holt, but he ran out of here. He's actually my next-door neighbor, and he's a good man, and he really has a heart for the city, so it was good to see him get recognized this evening. What you have before you is a resolution asking council to accept and award the aggregate bids for the City of Williamsport Streets and Parks Department. This is pretty standard, and basically what this is, these are approximate quantities of stones and materials we will use over a 12-month period. And what we do basically is we piggyback off other municipalities, townships, and boroughs through COG, which represents Council of Governments, where each respective borough, township, what have you, submits an estimated quantity to PennDOT. They advertise it, put it out for bid, which actually saves us a little bit on advertising fees, and they get the bids back, and it is eligible to be paid out of liquid fuels. So it's pretty standard, and it differs in a sense from our salt orders, where we have to order a 60% minimum of our order. We do not have to meet that criteria with these materials here. So.
Thank you, and I believe this was reviewed by
It was reviewed by Public Works and also went to Finance.
Okay, I'll start with Finance this time.
Everything appears to be in order. This is pretty standard, and we do see these every year. So Finance had very few comments and forwarded to the full body of council with a positive recommendation.
Thank you. Mr. Smith from Public Works.
This did come to Public Works on Tuesday, and as Mr. Silla pointed out, this is a standard bid process that we do once a year, and it's very, very enlightening, because we ask, what's the difference between 2A, 2B, 3C, 4D, and 5E? Subbase, 57 course aggregate. It's really enlightened us, doesn't it?
Yeah.
For a second there, I thought you were talking about phases of Mr. Grado's pathway to health.
Oh, no, we're talking about aggregate material. But without joking, yes. And Mr. Sillo did a fine job of getting the bids for us on that. And the pricing is about what we had paid previously. So we weren't looking at a lot of extra dollars for next year.
Fairly consistent from year to year. In
Yeah.
fact, some are identical to the previous year. So.
Right. So we reviewed this, and the committee passed it with a positive recommendation to full council.
Thank you. Other comments or questions from members of council? Mr. Noviello.
This is sort of outside this particular perimeter. I had an occasion over the last week here to take a bit of a ride with Mr. Sillo to various sites in the city where he enlightened me about some things that were taking place. And it was very enlightening. Some very positive things I would like to add, some corrections of some things that maybe need to be corrected in the past and are now on the way to being completely corrected. Also, some innovations that are very interesting that we will be seeing probably not too long from now, and as well as some fabrications that we did with some people that we have actually on staff. Mr. Sillo has been responsible for saving us what I consider to be more than a fair amount of money with this fabrication, and an implemented tool that will provide us with a great deal of service once I think they get all the kinks and bugs worked out, which they're in the process of doing now. I would hope that at some point in time, Tom, that you would bring that device in some fashion, paper-wise, to give us a bit of a rundown here on council about how this thing is to operate and some of the cost savings that might be available to us now.
Absolutely. I would be happy to
So
do that.
I appreciate Mr. Siddle's efforts up to now. He's certainly stepped into a demanding position, as we all know and remember. And in my estimation, he's done a pretty good job at keeping us where we need to be and also probably saving us some money down the line here as well. So congratulations to him and thanks to him for the ride. I got a free ride around town the other day, so it was pretty nice.
Very cool. Thank you. Mr. Allison, did you?
Just, if anybody would happen to look at this sheet, for the same materials, there's a higher price if it's delivered to the site, or whether we get it from our own stockpile. And Mr. Sillo pointed out to us that it's rarely do we ever need it or have it delivered to the site. The price is just quoted in case that happens to be, because we assumed that, but he cleared it up for us.
You know, we could be on a site where we may need just 1 ton of material where we can take it off the stockpile.
Right.
And I'd be hesitant to say if there were any vendors willing to deliver
Yeah.
something as little as 1 ton, so.
Probably not, yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Frank, on the resolution, please.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and that resolution is approved. Next item on the agenda is a resolution for a real estate exoneration. Mrs. Frank?
Real estate exoneration. Whereas the City Council of the City of Williamsport exonerates and approves the changes in 2016 real estate tax for the item below as submitted by the City Treasurer to the City Council. Parcel number 71-02-504, James and Linda Gibbons, the property address 2219 West 3rd Street, from $73,440 to zero. The reason, disabled veteran.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second on the resolution.
So, second.
Mr. Grimes, how are you this evening?
I'm doing well, thank you. Good evening, members of council. In front of you is a pretty straightforward real estate exoneration. This is for the property at 2219 West 3rd Street, changing the assessed value from $73,440 to zero for the reason of a disabled veteran, which was already approved by the county.
Thank you. Comments or questions from members of council? Mr. Henderson.
I'd just like to say, I know Mr. Gibbons. He is a servant, and I appreciate his service to this country. But he was also a teacher of mine when I was in high school, and he is serving this community in many ways. I think it's so appropriate that we do everything that we can to recognize our veterans, especially those that have served and paid physical price for their service. And so I am happy to do this, and proudly will I vote yes on this.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Hearing none, Mrs. Frank, on the resolution, please.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and that resolution is approved. Next item on the agenda is a resolution for agreement with eCollect. Mrs. Frank, please.
Agreement with eCollect PA LLC. Be it hereby resolved by the City Council of the City of Williamsport that the agreement attached hereto with eCollect PA LLC, 804 Fiat Street, Conshohocken, Pennsylvania, 19428, is hereby approved, and the appropriate city officials are hereby authorized and directed to execute said agreement.
Have a motion and a second on the resolution.
So move.
Second.
Hearing a motion and a second, Mr. Grimes.
Thank you again. This is a contract to perform auditing services on our business privilege and mercantile taxes, very similar to what we approved last year with Turnkey, who worked with eCollect Plus in that capacity. We did perform 21 audits since last summer when we approved the first contract. 20 of those audits have paid as of today, and we've collected over $300,000 in revenue from the city that was missed in previous years, mostly off large construction jobs that the contractors or subcontractors did not pay any business privilege tax or the correct business privilege tax on. This contract, eCollect was willing to negotiate with us. Their standard contract is for 20% commission or 25% if it goes over a certain amount of days. They've lowered that to 20% for us. They've also agreed to only take 20% of what's collected. A lot of times to get a payment in, especially in a timely fashion and without having to go through the legal process, which is costly, we can adjust the payments or penalty and interest on it. And under standard contracts with eCollect, they would take the full amount that they assessed, even if we would waive any of the fees associated with it. Here, they're only taking 20% of what's actually collected, which makes it easier for recording as well. This did go in front of Finance, and they asked for a few changes, which eCollect was happy to do. One of them was to change it from a one-year contract with an automatic 3-year renewal down to a one-year contract with an auto 1-year renewal. They also asked to have a termination clause for convenience in there, which they did add, which also added a part in Section 1, just to cover them where it said if they had any outstanding audits, they had that full year to get the payments on those. And that just covers them. So if they say, look, we found $500,000 for the city, and we said, okay, we're going to terminate that and we're going to collect it ourselves so we don't have to pay that 20%, that just lets them finish collecting what they've identified, but they wouldn't go out and seek any additional audits if we would terminate. They have also, originally it was a 4-year contract, and they were going to guarantee $150,000 in newfound money for the city. They've lowered that agreement to find $150,000 within the first year of the contract for the city. He's done a little bit of legwork already and research, and he's very comfortable with that number. And I do have representation here from eCollect as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize we could have shuffled around a little bit. Ms. Mealy from Finance?
Finance for this to the full body of council with a positive recommendation pending a handful of changes that we recommended and that Mr. Grimes has made reality in the last couple of days. They were both, we had, there was initially a 4-year contract period, and we recommended that 1 year with an automatic renewal of 1 year was probably a wiser length of time. And then, of course, we can always continue the contract moving forward. And we had recommended a termination without cause clause. Well, perhaps I think we, in concert with Mr. Nichols, recommended a termination without cause clause, and eCollect was kind enough to also include that within the final contract. So I think that at this point, obviously, we've had an excellent rapport with eCollect so far in the past year, and there's no reason not to continue the relationship for the next 2 years.
Thank you. Comments or questions from other members of council? Mr. Smith?
Did one of our solicitors review this agreement?
The first agreement that was very similar to this, with just the minor changes that were recommended by Finance, was reviewed by, I'm sorry, I forget now, it was a year ago. Who was it? Was it you, Mr. Smith? It was Mr. Lubin who reviewed that. And it's pretty much the same contract with the few changes that were recommended by Finance.
I think for the benefit of the audience, this is $300,000 that we wouldn't have had.
Absolutely.
And I want to thank the company that we've engaged with to do this work. As the mayor has pointed out several times, we need to bring in more money. We need to bring in more money. And I guess this is showing us that there's money outstanding. It's already out there, that we just needed to collect it. So that certainly is helping us with the budgetary problems that all cities have. So I want to thank you, Mr. Grimes, and also the gentleman from the company for doing this for us. We appreciate the work, and we also like to have the income from those dollars because it does help the budget, and ultimately it may help us with lowering, not lowering, but not having such a large tax increase at some point. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Mr. Allison?
Thank you, Mr. Grimes, and the representative from eCollect. Job well done, obviously. And nobody likes to pay taxes. We don't like to raise taxes. But this isn't adding any tax. It's really just making a level playing field with those who are already paying this tax. So we're just making everybody responsible and holding them responsible. So we're not trying to get blood out of a stone. We're just trying to make sure everybody's treated the same way. And thank you, Mr. Grimes, for initiating this.
You're welcome. And if I may add, they've also agreed to look at it. It's not just construction companies that have worked in the area, but they've been willing to work with us on questions or issues that we would have or that are specific to our area. And one of the discussion topics that came up is with some of the larger nonprofits in the area. There's a lot of for-profit entities that work with them, which can be very easy to miss and can also be hard to identify who is actually part of that nonprofit and who just works with the nonprofit to make a profit. And they've been very willing to walk through all of that with us and help us identify certain businesses that we may have missed and make sure that we're getting our full tax dollars that we should from those places. And maybe he won't be as happy to hear this, but to save us that 20% in the future on some of those large construction jobs, Mr. Girardi has started to supply us with every construction permit that's pulled in the city so that we can go back and look at our records from that year and say, okay, make sure that these companies have registered and paid their business privilege tax for all those construction jobs that went on.
That's a good idea. The one thing to add to all of this, the Finance Department and Mr. Pavlak provides council updated finance reports throughout the year, but at this time of the year we begin to see what the year closeout of the year before looks like and kind of see how this fits in with the overall budget from last year, which of course, if there's deficits, they get carried forward, and there's surpluses, those get forward. And looking on the page that represents taxes, we can begin to see what the impact of the additional revenue was, because as of the time we passed the budget that is reflected here at the end of 2014, we didn't have the relationship with eCollect and did not anticipate those revenues. And so to have those revenues in the end of year numbers here for 2015 and of course seeing them move forward through their impact on a cash flow basis in 2016. It's an important part of the revenue, and you know, at some point I would imagine the numbers will flatten out and kind of go to a lower steady state as more organizations who work in the city understand their responsibilities. But it's right now a very needed and useful infusion of cash, as Mr. Smith indicated.
And they have worked very hard in our area to identify that money. What you're seeing reflected in that 2015 closeout, we didn't approve the first contract with them until the summer of 2015, and it was a brand new contract with a brand new city that they didn't know, and they really got working quickly to do that, to assess our city and to get the boots on the ground and really work hard to find what needed to be found and get that money in for not only 2015, but now what's still to be collected in 2016.
Fantastic. Hearing no other comments, Ms. Frank, on the resolution.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and that resolution is also approved. Next item on the agenda is accept for filing. We have the Public Works Committee meeting minutes of February 16th, 2016, Controller's Report of February 2016, and Recreation minutes of March 7th, 2016. Can I have a motion to accept these for filing?
So move. Second.
Hearing a motion and a second. Any comments or questions from members of council? Hearing none. Ms. Frank on that motion.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and those are accepted. Next item on the agenda is announcements. Need to announce that immediately prior to the meeting this evening, City Council held an executive session for the purposes of negotiation. Also, I need to announce the appointment of an ad hoc committee meeting. An ad hoc committee. I think, tell me if I have this procedurally wrong, it's simply an announcing the existence of a committee whose purpose will be to explore the merits of a split tax system and provide recommendation to council on those merits, positive or negative, in 6 months' time. As president of council, I'll appoint Randall Allison, Joel Henderson, and Liz Mealy as the council members on that committee to explore the topic, and also invite the mayor to participate in that committee, or his designees as he sees fit. Also invite the city treasurer to participate, as well as invite representatives from the county to participate as designated by the county commissioners. Does it need to be anything more than that? All right. Then other announcements include upcoming meetings. On Monday, April 18th at noon is the Planning Commission meeting. Tuesday, April 19th at 10 a.m., I believe, the Blighted Property Review Committee. At 3:30 p.m. is the Housing Needs Committee meeting. And please add that to your list. 6:30 p.m. is the HARB meeting. On Thursday, April 21st at 10:30 a.m. is the Zoning Hearing Board. Monday, April 25th is 4 p.m. is the Recreation Commission. Tuesday, April 26th is Public Works at noon, and at 3:30 is the Finance Committee meeting. And Wednesday, April 27th at 11:30 a.m. is the Redevelopment Authority meeting. Are there any other announcements or comments by members of council? Mr. Allison.
A few weeks ago, there was a question brought up about the condition of our storm water catch basins. And one thing we learned from the feasibility study is that every stormwater catch basin in the city is going to be inspected and inventoried. So we will have an accurate assessment of the condition of each one of those, and if they're in disrepair, that's going to be noted and then eventually taken care of. So we're on top of that situation. The stormwater catch basin deterioration issue is being addressed and taken care of.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Allison.
Mr. Smith.
I just want to mention that, as I had said earlier, on top of all the projects that the Public Works Committee is working on, and the West 4th Street West, we call it, project, which is starting this year, we also now are going to be dealing with another large PennDOT project, which will be the reconstruction of 3rd Street from Campbell Street east to Basin Street, and also portions of Campbell Street. So in the next year, we've got an awful lot of work to do. So we will also be keeping in touch with PennDOT and keeping the public apprised of that project. Even though that doesn't directly affect us, it does in other ways, because we always get the complaints, whether it's a PennDOT road or a city street. So we are going to be on top of that, and the Public Works Committee now is aware that we may not only be having lunch, but we may be eating dinner here during these meetings. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing none from other members of council, Mayor, any comments from you or your administration?
Yes. Mr. Nichols? Thank you. Just want to report that the administration, the mayor, the solicitor's office, and finance office are prepared to bring forth finally an updated pilot agreement for the Susquehanna Health System, a 5-year agreement, and a related MOU document. We did give the information to the Finance Committee on Tuesday, and Joe Pavlock will be passing out the information after the meeting to the rest of members of council. I guess the strategy is to allow council, obviously, to offer any comments to the administration next week, if you have time to look at the documents, because it is an important document, and it does cover the next 5 years in our relationship with Susquehanna Health. So any comments that you can offer through next week would be most appreciated. In addition, we'll be meeting with members of the health system on Monday as well to go over the documents. So we're trying to get all the
moving pieces together so that this can be presented to you at the next council meeting.
Thank you. Anything else?
Colonel Anderson?
Members of council, I'd like to introduce my replacement, Amy Larson. She comes to us from Novalex, which is the largest paper and plastics packaging company. She was there as human resource manager. She's been on deck since the 4th of April, and we've been having a great transition, a lot of good conversations, and I know that she'll have the opportunity to meet each and every one of you individually, and I know that she looks forward to working with you, and just as I have. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And also, thank you for your time in the service of the city of Williamsport and for playing the role with the professionalism you've had. And I think I speak for my colleagues when we wish you well in your retirement.
Quickly want to add to that, my thanks for your service to the country as well.
Absolutely. Anything else, Mr. Mayor? Any comments or questions, comments from the general public? Seeing none, we'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.